بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, today we're going to be talking about Salatul Janaza, or the funeral prayer. This is a prayer which is an obligation upon Muslims to perform for the deceased. When someone passes away, as we've discussed before, we have a ghusl process, or washing the deceased body, and after that we have a shrouding process, which is the kafan. If you haven't learned about that, you don't know about that, check out the previous videos and the lessons we've done on the washing and the shrouding. And after that is done, the next stage is to have a janaza prayer, a funeral prayer, with the deceased body in the coffin, having been washed. And after that, it's the burial, inshallah ta'ala. So we're going to be discussing the Salatul Janaza. We have Hassan with us. Assalamu alaikum, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Sheikh. You okay?
Yes, well, alhamdulillah. So if you want to start reading, then we can start explaining and going through Salatul Janaza.
Okay. The prayer over the dead is a communal obligation. The pillars of the funeral prayer are the sayings of Allahu Akbar and the standing.
Yeah, so first of all, like I said, it's an obligation. And the type of obligation that the funeral prayer is what they call fard kifaya, or a communal obligation, meaning it's an obligation that has to be performed, but not by everybody. As long as part of the community perform this obligation of praying for the deceased and having an official janaza prayer. It's usually done at the masajid these days. Usually it was done out in the open. Actually, now with COVID, I think they are doing them out more in the open at the cemeteries, which is traditionally what was actually done. They'd have a section of the cemetery where they'd go and pray the janaza, and then they take the body from there to the grave, basically, which is very close by. And that in itself is enough. I mean, a few people is enough, to be honest, right? The congregation prayer is 3-4 people. But the more the better, right? The more people that pray, the more reward there is for the deceased, the more du'as there are for the deceased. And that's what janaza is. Janaza prayer, what is it? It's a form of prayer of asking Allah to forgive, to have mercy, to grant, entry to paradise for the deceased, as well as asking for protection for the living as well. And we'll see the dua shortly, which is from the sunnahs of the janaza prayer. The next thing mentioned there was the integrals or the fard components of the prayer. So if I'm praying janaza, what must I do to have performed the janaza prayer? And that is, you should say Allahu Akbar 4 times. There's 4 takbir when you start off with, which is any prayer starts off with takbir. And then there's 3 more takbirat. Those 4 takbir are all fard, meaning if you don't say Allahu Akbar 4 times, you don't have a janaza salah. You have not prayed janaza. Alongside that, one of the conditions of janaza salah, for those who are able to, and that's most of us, alhamdulillah, is to stand and do that. So you intend the janaza prayer, you say Allahu Akbar, it's for the deceased, it's a dua, it's behind the imam, it's a congregational prayer, it's not done alone. And you then do 4 takbir. Okay, those 4 takbirs you're going to say are, or 3 after the first one, on obligation, and you're going to be standing. Okay, so is that all we do? No, that's not all we do. There's also sunnah and other conditions of janaza. We haven't discussed them, so we need the actual deceased person to be there. You need to be in purification, for instance, right? So let's have a look at these other elements of the janaza prayer. But that was just the basic level of, this is an absolute must in janaza prayer, which is 4 Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, all separated, and there's certain things that go on in between those takbirs, and to be standing. So what else do we need to know about the janaza prayer? Tfaddal, Hassan.
6 conditions of funeral prayer. 1 and 2 are the deceased is to be Muslim and in a state of purification.
Yes. So number 1, the deceased individual, so the one we're praying for, is a Muslim, right? So there's no janaza prayer for non-Muslims, right? We'll leave that discussion for another day. We may have that later. And the purity of the deceased individual. So that happens through the ghusl. Okay, so when a person passes away, they don't enter the state of impurity, let's say, because that's not the case, right? But they do require the ghusl. The ghusl that was talked about in previous videos is an obligation, as we mentioned, a communal obligation on the community to perform for the deceased individual. And the rules are mentioned in the previous videos. That's a requirement before the janaza takes place. So the person has to be purified with a ghusl, a bathing. And once that's done, the person is ready for the janazah prayer. So that's two of the conditions. The other conditions are more to do with position and the body itself. So let's have a look at that. Bismillah.
Number 3, the deceased is to be placed in front of the people.
Yeah, so the janazah, the deceased person is placed at the front and you're all behind. And that's it. That's simple. Carry on.
Number 4, the body of the deceased or the majority of it should be present. If not, then half the body with the head is to be present.
Yep. So on that one, you need a body. So you can't just say praying janazah, so and so has passed away. There is an opinion you can do that. So you might find some masajid say, so and so has passed away in some country or in this place. We're going to pray the janazah for that person. You might find that. However, in the Hanafi school and in the majority opinion as well, actually, there is not a thing called Salat al-Ghaib, the prayer of the absent, or prayer in absentia, like the person is not there. The body of the deceased is required. There's only one example where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed janazah in absentia, meaning somebody passed away far away, and the Prophet actually prayed a janazah for that individual. And the scholars differed over the interpretation of that event, and that's why there's a difference in application. And simply put, because it was the only one occasion ever, most scholars regarded that as an exception the Prophet made for that individual. It's very specific and it's not for everyone. And so if somebody passes away and you're not there, you can't pray the janazah thousands of miles away or whatever, even if you live in the next town. You've got to go to the actual location that the body is and pray there. And that was just a special occasion for that particular individual who was the king of Abyssinia. So Ashama, the Negus, the Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, passed away. And the Prophet did pray janazah for him. And he's mentioned to the Muslims, the Sahaba, that your brother, he called him brother, he was a Muslim, passed away. So he prayed janazah for him. Didn't have anybody to pray janazah for him as well. So there's another element to add to that as well. There was no other Muslims there, possibly, that did janazah, because they all had migrated to Medina by then. So there's, if you look at it from that perspective, there's a special occurrence. We don't make any analogy on it and we don't take it and we leave it as it is. There were some scholars that said, and it's a valid opinion, we respect the opinion of the great ulama of the early generations, and it's still practiced today as well, alhamdulillah, that they said, no, that was actually a method of praying janazah if, the person is absent and you hear of the passing away, you can pray the janazah. I don't know the rules of that, so I don't follow that opinion. I've never prayed janazah in absentia. I don't recall ever doing it. And so what is the rule then? The body has to be present, okay? And if the body isn't present, there's no janazah. We must make dua. So janazah is dua. So if you don't have a body to make dua, janazah for and with, then just make dua. Keep making supplications. When somebody goes missing or they drown, you don't need to find their body and these kind of things. We still make dua for the deceased. We still pray for them. But actually perform the janazah salah, a body, or as it says, most of the body or half the body alongside the head being the main part. So long as there's a body to pray janazah over, if it's just an arm or a hand or a foot or a leg, then that wouldn't be enough or considered enough of a body. You still take those, wash them, put them in, do your best to wash them, put them in a cloth and bury them as well. So any part of a person that's amputated, even if you're living in a limb amputated, you're supposed to bury it in the ground. Any part of a human that comes off a human should be buried in the ground. So eventually all the body is buried in the ground, right? So that's the rulings of having the body present for the janazah. Tfaddal.
So what do you do a dua if you bury a part of the body, but the person's still alive? Like if they have an amputation?
So in that case, no, you make dua for them for the amputation, I suppose. But the actual part, they bury like an arm, they're burying an arm because it's been amputated. There's no dua for that. You just put it in a cloth, clean cloth, and then same as a burial that you dig a hole in the ground, you bury it and put soil over it. But there's no special procedure, there's no methodology. It's just bury it, however you want to bury it, basically. And there's no specific words or duas or anything. It's just bury it, basically. That's it.
Okay.
Number 5, the people who are praying over the deceased must not be riding or sitting unless there is a valid reason.
Yeah, so like we mentioned, you've got to be standing. That's one of the integrals. Therefore, you can't be riding or on a vehicle or this kind of thing. That wouldn't, unless there's an excuse, right? Unless you can't get off the horse or car and you're paralyzed or something. And there's excuses for circumstances. We're not talking about excuses. Normal circumstances, no being on a vehicle, right? Bismillah.
Okay, number 6, the deceased is to be placed on the ground during the prayer. If he is placed on a beast, such as a horse, or is held up by the hands of the people, then the prayer is not valid according to the chosen view, unless there is a legitimate reason.
Yeah, so the final condition he mentioned in Nur al-Idah of Imam Shurumulali rahmatullah alayhi, so the 6 conditions of the janazah prayer. The 6th one is that the actual deceased body be placed on the ground. Doesn't mean on the floor here, by the way. Don't place it on the floor, like literally on the ground. What it means is whatever platform it's on, it's on a table, it's on, you know, them different things they have, right? They have the what is they call them, wheels and that stand thing they have, right?
But the different things, I think generally you'll have like a trolley or a jack.
Trolley, that's it, that trolley type thing, or just sometimes you have a table and you can just put the
You
deceased
just have a table, yeah.
or whatever you put the deceased on needs to be firmly connected to the ground and not moving, right? So not an animal that's stationary, actual physical structure. So wooden structure is fine. If it has got wheels, it's fine as long as it remains stationary. So even a vehicle, so even in the vehicle, you could play the janazah if you just park the vehicle. Yes, well, obviously normally they bring the body into a particular area in front of the imam, in front of everyone, like we said, and there's a platform. So that's basically what it means. What about if we actually put it on a living animal or people carrying the deceased, not putting him on the floor? Would they be allowed to perform the janazah in that situation, right? No, it wouldn't. You can't perform the janazah if the deceased is being carried by people or carried on a animal or something like this, unless there's an excuse. There's nowhere to put him, you know, it's very sensitive, putting him down, the pressurized. There could be various reasons. If there are, fine. If there's no reasons, you're just carrying him. What on earth for? Place him on a platform or her and play the janazah and then go for the burial. So that's the condition, that we don't just carry the body or have it lifted for no reason. Is we put on something which is attached firmly to the ground, and then that janazah can then be performed. So that's the absolute must of a janazah is for Allahu Akbar and do that standing. These are the conditions. So one of the conditions is actually purity for the prayer. So you've got a new prayer, you need to be pure yourself. I didn't mention that. But yes, you've got to have tahara. I'll mention it later, a few other things regarding the Salat Janazah. But when you pray, don't just do the 4 takbeers, we said, right? You also add in certain aspects of prayer and supplication, right? So what are those? They are the following, and they come under the category of sunnah. I mean, this is how the Prophet ﷺ performed the janazah. If you miss 1 or 2 of these, it doesn't affect the validity of your janazah prayer. Of course, you should try and incorporate all of them. But if you come late slightly or you miss 1 or 2, it doesn't matter as long as you take part in the janazah and say for Allahu Akbar. And we'll talk about what if you come late. It's going to be mentioned slightly after that. So back to you, Hassan.
Okay, the sunnahs of the funeral prayer, 4 sunnahs. Number 1, it's sunnah for the imam to stand near the chest of the deceased, whether it is a male or a female.
Yep. So, like we said, the body's in front of the imam and everyone's behind the imam. So the body's in front of everyone. And where do you stand in terms of the body? You stand, basically have the body more or less in front of you, but stand towards the chest is how the Prophet ﷺ predominantly, we have the reports, did that. Bismillah.
Number 2, after the first Allahu Akbar, one is to recite the opening glorification, the sunnah.
Yeah, so when you say the first Allahu Akbar, like normal prayer, you say Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa tabarak asmuka wa ta'ala jadduka wa la ilaha ghayruk. The same thana, there are additional wordings you can learn and mention, but if you just recite the one you already know in everyday prayers, that's what you do after the first takbir. That's what the Prophet ﷺ used to do after the first takbir, to praise, glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you do what? Then you perform a second takbir. What do you do next?
After the second Allahu Akbar, it's sunnah to recite the blessings on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi
wasallam. After the second Allahu Akbar, normally you recite the blessings on the Prophet sallallahu at the end of your prayer, but the janazah prayer isn't a full prayer. There's no bowing prostration, as you noticed, right? So you say Allahu Akbar a second time, and this is where you read the blessings or salutations upon the Prophet sallallahu. And again, there's specific wording you can learn for the janazah prayer, or you can just recite the one you learn for your normal prayers, which is Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. You might hear other words added in, slightly different. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik, and kama sallamta wa barakta. There's different wordings, but as long as you recite a form of salutations and salawat or durood, as we say as well, upon the Prophet ﷺ at that time. Is the specific wording is not must. Sending salutations is a sunnah. Okay, that's what's required. Any form is valid in the Arabic language, and there's several from the hadith that should be used at that stage. The most famous being the one we already use in the normal prayers. Yep. The next one, Hassan.
After the third Allah Akbar, to supplicate for the deceased is a sunnah. This should not relate to anything other than the matters pertaining to the hereafter. If, however, one supplicates for the deceased with that which is transmitted from the Prophet, it is superior and more effective.
Yeah, so on that point, so first of all, there's no particular dua that you have to do. Okay, so when at this point you make dua for the deceased, the idea is to make dua for forgiveness, to ask for mercy, ease of the journey of the soul, and the barzakh, the life in the grave, and anything to do with that. So that's what it should be about, of course, right? That there's nothing specific, but of course, the theme of the dua is for a deceased person, and what's that going to be? Mercy, forgiveness, the journey to the akhirah, the next life. And of course, we do have several du'as, several supplications, wordings from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When somebody would pass away, he would make a supplication for them. The one that is mentioned here is not the one that we're accustomed to reciting. Those of you may have learned about Janazah Salah before, which is Allahumma ighfir li hayyina wa mayyitina wa shahidina wa ghaibina wa saghirina wa kabirina wa dhakarina wa unthana. Allahumma man ahyaytahu minna fa ahyihi ala al-islam wa man tawaffaytahu minna fa tawaffahu ala al-iman. Is that it?
That's the one, yeah.
That's the one, yeah. So when you try to do a dua outside of the time you do it, like in Janazah you do it. We try to do it now, it's like, what dua is that? Janazah dua. So you need a reminder sometimes. Thank you for this. You need to start off the dua. So that's the most famous one that's often taught in the books, and and children learn the Janazah dua at the madrasa, so when they're young, and that's what I learned as well. However, there are many other actually supplications the Prophet mentioned or carried out during the Janazah of some of the Sahaba. Among them is the following one. So I'll read it in Arabic, and then you can read the translation, inshallah. But that's the best thing to do, to try and learn some of the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ, and then read them in your Janazah Salah, and also to do dua as much as you can. So the one mentioned here is it says here, Auf was one of the companions, Auf ibn Malik. He says that from the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ, when he was at a Janazah, he heard the Prophet say the following: Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu wa'afihi wa'fu anhu wa akrim nuzulah wa wassi' mudkhalah واغسله بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقه من خطاياه كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وابدله دارا خيرا من داره وأهلا خيرا من أهله وزوجا خيرا من زوجه وادخله الجنة وعذه من القبر ومن عذاب القبر وعذاب النار. And the hadith actually says, which is not mentioned in the book, it just mentioned the dua, that when Auf ibn Malik, who heard the dua, he was one of the narrator, which is Sahih Muslim hadith. This narration, this dua from Sahih Muslim. He said, I wished I wished I was the deceased when I heard that dua. When I heard the Prophet make this dua for that person, I was like, I wish I was the one who had passed away and got that dua from the Prophet. So obviously, what does it mean? You're like, oh, what does it mean then? Bismillah, if you want to read the translation, Yusuf. Hassan, sorry.
O Allah, forgive and have mercy upon him, excuse him and pardon him, and make honorable his reception. Expand his entry and cleanse him with water, snow, and ice, and purify him of sin as a white robe is purified of filth. Exchange his home for a better home, and his family for a better family, and his spouse for a better spouse. Admit him into the garden, protect him from the punishment of the grave and the torment of the fire.
Yes, subhanAllah. So that's the meaning of that dua, which the Prophet made for one of the various companions, mashallah. So then now you've done 3 takbeers. Remember, after the first one, you did glorification. After second of Allah. Second one, you did the salawat, the durood to the Prophet ﷺ, upon the Prophet. Now the third one we just mentioned, you make a dua, right? And you can make various duas that in Arabic, let's say, and as much as you can. You want to make a dua in general, like in your own language. You do that outside of the prayer. But in the prayer, it's Arabic duas that you know. And if you don't know any Arabic duas, I don't know any Arabic duas, right? Or you know Rabbana atina fid dunya, just make those duas. So just say Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. Allah give us the good of this life, the good of the next life. With that intention, yes, the good of this life, the good of the next life, then you're intending the du'as for the deceased. You know, there's a simple dua like Rabbi Firli, oh Allah forgive me, Allah forgive me. You can say Rabbi Firhu, oh Allah forgive him, oh Allah forgive him. It's, you know, people don't know Arabic much if they don't know these du'as. Just make any Arabic dua that you know that from the Quran and Sunnah. It's perfectly fine. Okay. Yeah, it does have to be Arabic in the janaza. Like I said, if you want to make your own du'as and make them lengthy and stuff, then you do that outside of the salah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it says exchange family for a better family, spouse for a better spouse,
Yeah.
does it mean like different people?
I think it just means, Allahu Alam, I'm not sure. It's a very good question, and I'm only going to have a bit of guesswork here, not a proper answer, unfortunately, just put that up as a disclaimer. I think it just means the company in the grave, it'll be better than the company in the home. So when you're at home, it's fine. It's your family. You might even have a very good company. Let's pray that everyone has good stuff at home. But when you go to the barzakh, you want to go to a higher level. You want to go to a better place, not a worse place, right? So it's basically saying whatever happens in the grave, hope it's better than what was in life, right? Make it better for that person. So I'm not really sure it means literally change, you know, have another spouse there and forget about your spouse and have another family there. I don't think it's literally meaning that. I think it just means, so it means, Ahl means family, it means people around you, your home life, etc. So your Ahl in the graveyard, for the inhabitants of the graveyard, there's not going to be a new family there for you, right? Literally. So
Would
it just
there be
means
angels there?
there'll be angels, yeah, probably there's angels in the barzakh, so I suppose doing stuff as well. But it's the deceased in that graveyard. So hopefully you get a nice graveyard, yeah, with the Muslims and stuff as well.
Inshallah.
You know, if Makkah, Medina, some people pass away there, they're buried in the graveyards there, which is amazing. But yeah, you know, so they will be your company and they'll speak to you. So the hadith say when you go there, they'll welcome you. They'll ask how you are. They'll ask about people who have are living, how so and so, how so and so. Yeah, obviously there's a life in the barzakh. It's not just you're alone. And there are certain stages, which is not the topic of today because that's all about beliefs and stuff, right? But yeah, good question though. I think it's a good question. Now we've got one more takbir left, Hassan. Carry on.
After the fourth Allahu Akbar, the finishing salams are observed without supplication, and this is the most evident opinion on the matter.
Yeah, so after the fourth takbir, Allahu Akbar, 4 times now. You've done the 4 takbir, you said, which are an obligation. After each one, there was something to do. First, glorification. After the second, salutation of the Prophet ﷺ. After the third, which is the main part of the janazah, which is the dua. Then the 4th takbir. So after the 4th, what happens? You finish your prayer and you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and that's it. You've done the janazah prayer. Okay. Now you may see and you may even hear after the 4th takbir, Allahu Akbar, 4th takbir, there may be a short dua made. Okay. Sometimes and in some reports or some scholars, they'll make a short dua like Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu, or Allahumma la tiftinna wa la taftinhu. Oh Allah, forgive us and forgive him. Oh Allah, don't make things a trial for us or a trial for him. And then they will say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So sometimes you hear, and I have heard it a few times myself, an insertion of a very short dua. It's like a simple, oh Allah, don't put us to trial kind of thing. Oh Allah, protect us and the deceased from any trials. Just those words, basically. They add that in just before the salam, after the 4th takbir. But normally in the general way it's practiced, and you know you'll find everyone doing, and what I've done and we've learned when we were young, is after the 4th salam, after the 4th takbir, the 4th Allahu Akbar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and the janazah is finished. Okay, that's it, done. Yep.
Okay, the hands are not to be raised for the takbirs except for the first one.
Yeah, so during the prayer, when we say Allahu Akbar, do we raise the hands or not? Okay, that's a big question as well. For the first one, it's unanimous, you raise the hands. So everyone says when you start the prayer, Allahu Akbar, to the ears or the shoulders, doesn't matter, you raise your hands. And you tie them, again, above or below the navel, they fit over, but yeah, you tie them. And you pray the janazah prayer. Now, during the janazah prayer, when you say Allahu Akbar for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th takbir, do you raise your hands or not? Again, there's a difference of opinion. In the Hanafi school, what we're studying here, and the reports that they base their actions upon, which is a bit from the Sahaba. No, there is no raising of the hands after the first takbir. So you don't raise the hands for each takbir. Just say Allahu Akbar verbally, and you just do the next part of the janazah prayer. However, you will find, and I love seeing these differences. I find them exciting and nice. I don't know, people get upset over differences or why is there a difference? Alhamdulillah, plurality. Look, Islam tolerates things within itself. There are people who can accept a lot. Why don't we learn this and be like this, right? Yeah, if you want to raise your hands, and people do that, I've seen it very commonly. For every takbir of the janazah prayer, Bismillah, go ahead and do that. It's not, the scholars have differed since, the Sahaba differed since day one. There was pretty much a plurality and acceptance of multiple options or opinions on a lot of things, right? Not everything, but a lot of things. But when it comes to the absolute beliefs, let's say, right, and Aqidah as we call it, then there's a lot more. It's very nuanced and it's very detailed, but it gets complicated. And I think that's generally, where most of the problems arise rather than the fiqh side. The fiqh side, I think everyone, like you said, through knowledge kind of gets to the idea of acceptance or tolerance, and there's room for it. I think with the Aqidah side, which I'm not going to go into because it's not a class of Aqidah, right? There is a bit more to it and a bit more, lack of, let's say, acceptance.
Okay, if the Imam says Allahu Akbar for the 5th time, the followers do not join him. Rather, they wait for the finishing salams of the Imam, and this is the opted view on the matter. Yeah, so in case the Imam does a 5th takbir, so there's 4 takbir you said, and then you do salam after the 4th one. The Imam does a 5th one or the 6th one. There are reports again that the Prophet did extra takbirs for certain Sahaba or certain occasions. I think on the Battle of Badr or Uhud, the martyrs got extra takbir. Sayyidina Ali might have done 1 or 2 extra for certain people as well. So he knew that this person fought in Badr with extra takbir. That was again specific to that time, and there's no more than 4 Allahu Akbars in a janazah salah. And anybody who increases, we don't follow, just wait. So even a 4th one or 5th one, or a 6th one, just wait until he does the salam, which he will eventually do, the Imam. And then you follow the Imam in the salam as well. And then what's after that? Any other? So these are just rules now surrounding the janazah prayer. That's one of them. If the Imam was to do a 5th one by mistake or deliberately, you wouldn't do a 5th takbir. You'd wait for the Imam to give salam, and then you join him in the salam. And there's some more rulings regarding just one, which is about the child. If the deceased was an insane or young boy or young girl who had not reached puberty, then one is not to supplicate forgiveness for them because they've committed no sin. Rather, one should supplicate, "O Allah, make them a source of our salvation and make him or her a source of reward and treasure for us, and render him or her an intercessor for us and one whose intercession is accepted."
Yeah, so again, when you're young and you're madrasa, I remember learning this dua, but never remember actually remembering it afterwards, because it's rarely used, because alhamdulillah, there's not many children that die young, right? So usually you do dua for adult. So this is like a supplication of forgiveness for the child. Why? And also an insane person means somebody who's not got in the intellect and wasn't, fully accountable was not accountable because he or she wasn't fully, had the intellectual capacity to, pray, fast, etc. The rulings of fiqh, we all should know these kind of things. Somebody of that nature, or a child who's not accountable as well, passes away. What do we do then? Is there dua for forgiveness? No, there isn't. There's no dua for forgiveness, because we believe but what we have in our language, which is Urdu, Punjabi, they're masoom. Yeah, you heard of that, Hassan? They're masoom?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what that means basically is they're free of sin. They're innocent. They're blemishless. They're flawless. They're not got anything wrong. So what's the dua for then? The dua is for us. The dua is that Allah make them, and the dua in Arabic is Allahumma ij'alhu lana farata waj'alhu lana ajran wa dhukhra waj'alhu lana shafi'an mushaffa'a. That's for a boy or a male who passes away who's innocent, which basically means what you said. Allah make the person for us a faratan, which is like an intercessor for you. So the person will actually help you. The child will help the parents, and the people who are praying for it, for him or her. Make it him or her. So if you change the wording for her, the wording given is for him. Which if you don't, this is the thing, when you learn that janazah prayer, they say, this is for the boy, and they teach you the boy version, like the dua for the boy, which is a dua for you more than the boy. And this is the dua for a girl. If you go to a janazah and a boy has passed away, you're going to read this. And if it's a girl that's passed away, you're going to read, like a young girl, young boy, you're going to read this, right? You remember that, Hassan, when they used to teach you that and tell you that?
Yeah, we used to have the little Nurani Qaidas with
Yeah.
the duas on there, yeah.
Yeah. So that they're the 2 duas, and one of them is mentioned there for the boy, and it just basically says that make him a treasure for us, a reward for us, somebody who intercedes and whose intercession is accepted. Okay, so that actually is basically the janazah prayer, some extra rulings towards it as well. The next section is also about the janazah prayer, but a question that arises is who leads the janazah prayer? And what if we get multiple janazahs together? Can the janazah prayer be prayed twice? There's still more kind of general rulings around the janazah prayer. So we'll read on. Bismillah.
The one most entitled to lead the funeral prayer. The Sultan or the ruler has the most right to lead the funeral prayer. After the Sultan, his deputy is the one with the most right. Subsequently, the judge is the one who has the most right. After this, then the Imam of the locality, then the guardian or family.
Yeah. So sorry to put you off there. Then the guardian of the family member, which means the closest male relative. Sorry, I said. So who's gonna pray the janazah, right? Again, this is to keep things orderly, to keep things in check. Nobody can just say, "I'm the janazah prayer. I lead the janazah," because sometimes janazah have thousands of people, and it's a big thing. And there needs to be some law and order to this kind of thing. Like somebody randomly can't just jump forward. Oh, he was my best friend. He was my this. He was my that. I want the honor of praying his. Because sometimes at the big janazah, especially even a small janazah, people might want to pray the janazah for the deceased or lead the janazah, right? Leading and praying are two different things. So there needs to be an order if there is a situation that arises where we have the kind of issue of who's leading, and that is basically the leader of the Muslims, Sultan, the Khalifa, whatever it was, is the one who's most rightful to lead any congregational, communal congregational prayer, whether that's Jummah, whether that's Eid prayers or the Janazah prayer. He doesn't have to, but he has that right to take lead of these prayers. Okay. Then anybody he appoints, so a deputy leader, senior minister, whoever he wants to be in that place and he's assigned, that he can do that. He has a right to make a deputy for the prayers, just for the prayers even. So this is the person who's going to lead all the prayers. And usually it's a learned person, usually it's somebody qualified, it's not going to be a random person. Then the Qadi, so there's no judge there, there's no leader there, there's no naib there. Qadi is around. The Qadi is a religious authority. Qadi is the judge, right? The religious judge. So the Qadi here is not just a general judge, the Islamic judge who deals with Islamic issues such as sighting of the moon, such as divorce issues, such as whatever the really halal and haram, some fatwas are needed. So it's like a big. So the Mufti gives fatwas. The Qadi is in a higher position than a Mufti, right? He actually tells the Mufti what to do or what not to do, and what they should be saying and not saying. So he's like the head of the Islamic law courts, right? He's a senior judge, the appointed Qadi. He has the right to lead the prayer. So if he's around, he'll say, "Look, I'm leading. Nobody can stop him," etc. Then after that, but there's no authority, no person of authority there, but we're at a masjid, and that's most likely what's going to happen. You've got the family members and you've got the masjid locals, right? So the person who's most rightfully leading the prayer now is the imam of the masjid. When you say the imam of the masjid, you mean the appointed imam of the masjid, right? So most masajid have officially employed imams, right? And in the past, that was the case as well. They would be officially appointed by the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And we know that's the person who leads the prayers in this masjid. Sometimes there are two imams and you lead so and so. They actually have the fixed, you lead these prayers, you lead those prayers. So you have two imams. So they will decide amongst themselves who leads if there's more than one. And if there's just one, he will lead if he wants to. Like I said, this is only if it's needed to be applied. Somebody's arguing over it. Then we'll say, look, stop the argument. This is the rules. Just go with them, right? But if he wants, he can hand over to the next category, which is often offered. So I've been there where the imam says, is there any family member that wants to lead the janazah? Although the imam is obviously ready to do that. Sometimes there's no family member that's comfortable or really wants to never ever led a janazah in his life, right? So he's not going to step forward, but he'd love to, so he doesn't. But sometimes there is maybe among the family members of the deceased, a male who's a scholar, who's learned, who wants to lead the janazah, right? And the imam should therefore offer and say, look, anybody want to? And I've seen that happen, and people have stepped forward and lead the janazah of their family member. And again, that's usually someone they all agree to or they're all happy with, right? It's not, oh, I want to step forward. Wait a minute, who you step forward? It's not usually a random person that steps forward from the family. It's somebody of, piety, of knowledge, of, morals and righteousness, right? So that's just there to keep order. In reality, anybody can do the janazah. There's no invalid person to do the janazah. It just has to be an adult male, basically, who's an adult male and who basically knows what's going on and wants to pray the janazah. That's it, So as long as the janazah is prayed by an adult male, that covers it. If there is a lot of people and who leads it, etc., this is the order given. Yeah. So back to you, Hassan.
Okay. The one with the most right to lead the funeral prayer may give permission to the others to lead the prayer. And if others with lesser right lead the funeral prayer without permission and in the absence of the ruler and his deputies, then the one with the most right may repeat the prayer if he wishes.
So when we have a situation where there was somebody with more rights, and this is to do with the family, so we just mentioned who it is. So first of all, we mentioned you can give the permission to somebody else, right? If you want somebody else to lead the prayer, you can give the permission. If no permission is given, then this applies to the family members. So the family members are the people who should lead the prayer, right? And somebody else steps in and prays. It's not somebody of higher rank, such as the imam or the qadi or someone. It's just a random person. And the family are like, wait a minute, why did he pray our janazah for? And they didn't pray themselves. So they missed the janazah. If they're happy to pray behind him, that's their choice, right? So they weren't there, they missed the janazah, or they didn't realize that he led the janazah, like, wait a minute, he shouldn't be leading it. Then they have a right, those family members who had a right to lead the prayer itself, to have a second janazah, okay? So they can pray the janazah again with them leading the janazah, and that's allowed in such a case only. That's the really only case where there'll be two janazahs, right? When a family member not is superseded by somebody from the imam of the masjid or another leader, or even his elder brother or somebody more rightful to lead. It's only superseded by a stranger. And wait a minute, he's not happy. If he's like, oh, alhamdulillah, let him lead, and I'm fine with it. Remember, he has the right to do that. But if he's actually that's done without his knowing, and all of a sudden he's upset with that, then yes, he can say, look, I didn't want that person to lead the janazah. I had more right. We had more right as a family, and I actually disagreed to that. And he can, veto and have a repetition of the janazah. Yes. So in that case, he can, if he wants. It's not a requirement, but if he wants, he can have a second janazah. However, as it mentioned there, whoever's prayed the first janazah doesn't pray in the second one. There's only one janazah for the people who pray janazah. If you prayed the first one with whoever the imam was, it's a valid janazah. We don't say it's invalidated. That was a janazah prayer. You've all done janazah. Now we can do a second one for this family member and the people that were not informed of this and they're not happy with it and they haven't prayed the first one yet. So there might be 10 of them, might be 20 of them, might be 5 of them. They'll pray a janazah. Straight there and then, janazah takes 2 minutes, right? I'm going to do another half an hour procession or something. They'll pray their janazah, and only them. So there'll be no second massive congregation of people performing the second janazah, unless they are people that arrive late and haven't prayed and join in. I mean, the second janazah won't be a big thing, but yeah, that's how it works. So if you're in the UK with the body and the deceased, and you pray a janazah, and then you travel with the deceased to whatever country you're taking him to, which in itself, going to be mentioned later on, is not good. Then you don't pray a second janazah. When you arrive there, you don't take part in that janazah. Why? Because you prayed in the first one. So if you pray janazah once, it's not a void, it's done, and you can't then repeat the janazah prayer. Hope that answers questions. Hassan, you got anything on that?
No, that's fine. There will be some questions coming, but I think, as you mentioned, we might go over them in a bit.
Okay, then. So let's carry on. Bismillah.
The one most entitled to lead the funeral prayer has more right than the person whom the deceased instructed in a will to lead the prayer after his death, and the fatwa issued is according to this view.
Yeah, so now another situation where you might want to write down in your will that when I pass away, I want so and so to lead my janazah prayer. Okay, that so and so might be a teacher, might be a friend, might be a close family member, might be somebody you really respect and love. So you put a name down, okay? So on the day of your janazah, does that person get to lead the prayer because you wrote that in your will and you wanted that? Of course, it should be allowed, and one should, the family members and so forth, if that's what you had in your will, then they should honor that request, let's say. However, the scholars did discuss this and they said, well, wait a minute, can you really control that? It's not your right to tell anybody who prays your janazah. It's actually the right of the family, believe it or not. It's not your right, and it might deny them of their right, which might be upsetting to them, and so forth. So it's allowed, but with the permission of the family. So if you want to take, and they should, what they actually say is, all the ruling given here is that wasiyah, that will that's written doesn't have to be followed. That meaning, it doesn't have to. The family can say, no, well, we don't want that person to lead. They should really allow it because it does both things. It allows you to have your request fulfilled, your will, and also you will get the same blessings as anybody reading your janazah prayer, right? I mean, you preferred that person, so you're probably hoping for more blessings by having the name of that person. Of course, people differ in their piety and du'as. I'm not going to go into that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's not required. There's nothing wrong on the part of the living family members if they were to stop the person who the deceased had named. But at the same time, from a like more of an etiquette and just doing the right thing perspective, I personally would wish to fulfill the request of a deceased family member and make them happy by doing that and send them off in that way. But yeah, with that, like I said, some things are technical and rulings are there for circumstances, but these aren't rulings, as you can see, that are must do's or must not do's. They're just there to help if a situation arises. So practically speaking, yeah, go ahead and lead. I don't mind, go ahead. But you could actually say, well, actually, I would like to stop you, and I prefer that because I had intentions to pray the janazah of my father, and I want to do that. And yes, it's a right that you have to exercise, and you do that. So it's just an example there of what to do in such a situation. Tafaddal, Hassan.
If the deceased is buried without a funeral prayer performed over him, then it is to be offered over his grave, even if the deceased had not been washed, provided the body has not begun to decompose.
Yeah, so somebody's buried without a janazah, which unfortunately may happen. Sometimes, even in the UK, people are pass away, they're not family members, and they don't, Muslims don't get involved. Sometimes they do, of course, and they do the full Islamic rites of funerals. But sometimes, and I've come across one occasion from where I'm from in Sheffield where this happened, a lady passed away, and nobody was informed that she was, I think, alone, no family. And she was buried and everything, right? So they buried her, they didn't cremate her, which is good. But nobody paid the janazah, nobody even did the ghusl, I think, right? So some brothers were informed of this and they were like, you serious? He goes, yep. So basically, what do you do then? You basically go to the graveyard and you pray janazah there, right? That doesn't mean you pray on the grave or you pray to the deceased. Janazah is to Allah. But remember, the ruling is that janazah, to pray janazah, you need a body. Okay, where's the body? In the graveyard. So you just go there and you pray janazah for the deceased. Okay, what if there's no body? Meaning, what if it's decayed? Then there's no janazah. So he says, until the body, as long as the body does not decay. And that obviously differs from place to place. And that could be, several months for some places. It could be years for the places. And there's no way of getting to know that at all. There's no, we're not going to dig up the grave to figure that out. No, we're not going to do that. So what they say is basically whatever the grave diggers, the specialists, they know how long it takes for bodies to decompose. They'll say, yeah, that body's gone. There's nothing left now. Because I know I worked in this graveyard for the last 20 years. And, when I dig up stuff and check, bodies are decomposed within a year. Hotter climates quicker. It'll be like a year or two. I sometimes actually put chemicals in to help the decomposing to make space in certain graveyards. But usually takes several years. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. So in the UK, in this land, in that land, in this graveyard, this soil, it could be different. You need to just go with the opinion of the grave digger, the specialist there, and say, look, what do you think? Is that body decomposed? Yeah, is it still there? Because yeah, obviously I'll be decomposed a little bit, but the majority of the body still be there. Okay, we can do janazah because there's a body still there and it's not fully decomposed and not a body anymore, etc. There's no ghusl required because, like I said, you don't dig up the grave and you just leave it as it is, and it's an exception to the rule because of what's happened. So that's actually what happens if somebody passes away without a ghusl or a janazah and they're buried. As long as we believe their bodies to still be under the ground and not, just decomposed into bones, then yes, we will pray a janazah for the deceased. Okay. Now another mas'ala, another situation, which happens in sometimes, and I think you will come across it, and you may have already, is multiple janazahs. Okay, what if we get, a few people passing away at the same time, different families or whatever. But right, let's do the janazah. Well, when we come to the masjid or when we come to the janazah, there's three janazahs to pray, or three deceased individuals there. What do we do? Do we do one janazah each? Do we do one for everyone? Do we combine them? Do we separate them? So that's the next situation and scenario. So if you read on Hassan, we'll find out the rulings, inshallah.
If there are several bodies, it is best to perform a separate funeral prayer for each body. The first funeral prayer is to be performed upon the most pious, and then upon the second, and in this sequence. If there are several bodies, it is valid to perform a single funeral prayer for all of them by putting the coffins in a long line closest to the Qibla in a way that the chest of each of them is in front of the Imam.
Yeah.
The Imam.
So basically, there's a few things here to mention then. So first of all, it's optimal to do individual janazas. There's three people there. Okay, who comes first then? It's a judgment of the people, right? Or the Imam, I suppose, whoever's in charge. But obviously, it's always better. And the Prophet did obviously honor the more pious. And he would say, who knows more Quran? This one knows more Quran. Okay, put him first into the grave. Give honor to the people of knowledge, people of Quran, people of piety. I mean, that's a judgment. It's going to be subjective. Everyone's going to have their own judgment. But that's left to the decision of the Imam, etc. So if they do an order, say let's do the first one, like we should do first. Our family member first, right? We want to. Why should we place theirs first? No. First of all, let's not have an argument. If there's going to be who's first, then the Imam decides, simply put, right? And the authority, there's other authorities, they'll decide. Play the janazah, and the family can take away that individual and bury him or her, etc. And then be a second janazah, a third janazah, and then everyone disperses, right? Or you can do one janazah, as it says, and you can pray all of them together at once. And if you were to do that, it says you make all of them into a line, one behind the other. So there's one who's close to the Imam, one who's after the Imam, after that person. So if we did a little diagram maybe to help everyone and show everyone the diagram. So you see, this is the Imam here. He's going to be praying there like that, right? So each person is placed on a, their table thing, right? That's one person. Then the second person here, the deceased, and then the third. So they all placed in front of the Imam, and he places the chest of them, so not necessarily in the middle, but yeah. And then there's people behind that will be in their rows. Yeah, and they'll be paying janazah. It does say there, well, it doesn't say it there, but it is mentioned actually in some books that it is slightly different, which is the Imam's there, right? And then in front of the Imam is the first person, so like that. And then the second person is made slightly to the head. So if the head's on this side, right, that's the head of the deceased. The second person is slightly lower, like that, and the head is there. And the third person is slightly lower. So they're like that somewhat. That is mentioned as well. But the one that's mentioned in the book here is that basically. You put them in a line. And again, who comes first and closest to the Imam? Again, leave that to the Imam to decide, but they do say the most pious is the closest. And then, and so forth, which again is a judgment that I don't think we're qualified to make necessarily, but just bear that in mind, I suppose, right? So yeah, Bismillah.
Maintaining the order when placing the bodies in this manner is vital. Verily, the men are to be placed nearest to the Imam, then the boys after the men, then the hermaphrodites, followed by the females.
Yeah, so when I was saying the most pious first, it wasn't a case of just men. You don't mix men and women up. Just like in rows, when you have the men behind the Imam, then the boys, and then the women at the back. Similarly, when you if there's multiple janazas, you'd have the men first. How do you order the men? We just mentioned the Imam's judgment, whoever's probably his favorite more than the pious. I don't know, maybe the most pious, inshallah. And then the boys, and then at the end you would have the ladies. So the furthest away from the Imam, like you said, you make that order. And then there's these things called hermaphrodites. They're not going to be around. Forget about them, right? Bismillah.
If all the bodies are buried in one grave because of a necessity, then they are to be placed in the opposite arrangement.
And by the way, now in some graveyards or cemeteries, the better word for it, they do need a lot of support because they're getting sometimes multiple janazas in one day. So if you put your name down, they'll call you in. They'll say, oh, today we've got like 7 janazas. We didn't expect so many. Come down and help. So do volunteer for your local cemetery, and obviously if they call you and you're free, go down and help. It's big rewards, helping the burials and all of that process. It's really big reward, and it's a big khidmah, it's a big service to the community, which is somewhat neglected. Obviously in your community, depending on where you're watching and how highly Muslim population there is, there might not be a big requirement, right? But in some areas of the UK, especially where there's a dense population of Muslims, there is a requirement right now, and people asking for help. So do volunteer if you can, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions, guys? Yusuf? No? Hassan? Okay, Bismillah, carry on, Hassan. Oh, sorry, yeah, we didn't even discuss that. So Yusuf took us on a tangent.
Sorry.
Then we were on the question on if you missed the beginning of the janazah. So let's do that. So if I read it again, Hassan, so just we can go through it.
Okay. One who arrives late to the funeral prayer and finds the imam silent between 2 takbeers is not to join the imam. Rather, he is to wait until the imam says the next takbeer and then enter with him, and he is to correspond his supplications with the imam's supplications. The latecomer is to make up what he missed before the dead body is lifted up.
Yeah, so thank you. So let's just explain that part. So you arrive late to the janazah, meaning you missed the opening takbir or opening 2 takbirs or so forth, right? So what do? You do the next takbir with the imam, whenever it is, and you join the janazah. Okay, so let's say you missed the first one, you missed the second one, you got the third one, Allahu Akbar. Okay, Allahu Akbar. After the third takbir, we've already explained, you supplicate. Okay, it's dua. So you do dua straight away. Yeah, you don't do sana. So you join the imam and you follow where the imam is from, where the imam is. And then you do the 4th takbir with the imam. The imam is going to do salam, isn't he? After the 4th takbir, he said that. But you've only done 2. You've joined with the first one and you read your supplication. You've done the second one, but you've got 2 left. Remember, we said 4 takbirs are a requirement. 4. You've done 1 to enter the prayer. You've done 1 after your dua. You've done the dua now. That was sunnah. So now you do the second one with the imam. The imam gives salam. Do you give salam, Hassan? No. Thank you. You do a takbir, another takbir, and then salam. You don't have to read Durood Sharif. You don't have to read Thana. If you want to quickly read it, you can. But just do Allahu Akbar. So we've got to Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and your janazah is complete. Okay, so that's how you would perform the janazah if you missed the first 2 takbir. If you missed the first one, you're on the second one. Then after the second one, you read citation of the Prophet ﷺ. After the third one, which should be your second, right? You read the supplication. After the 4th one, which is your third, the imam will give salam. You will do a 4th, right? And then you will give salam. So you don't have to do the recitation. You just got to do the takbir if you miss them. However, if you join on the 4th takbir, you've missed the prayer. So you can't join the prayer on the 4th takbir. So you could miss 1, 2 takbir. If you miss the 3rd one and you join the 4th one, you can't actually take part in the janazah prayer. Okay, so you need to get in there with the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. Join on the 1st one, join on the 2nd one, join on the 3rd one. The 4th one, too late. Is there a bird in the background, Hassan?
Nope, it's in the other room.
It's in the room. You can still hear a little bit. It's fine. Bismillah, go ahead.
A person who was present with the imam at the opening Allahu Akbar is not to wait for the next takbir of the imam before joining.
Yeah, so what that means is, when you sometimes you're there and the imam says Allahu Akbar and you're still making attention and stuff, you don't say, oh, I missed the takbir because you didn't do it instantaneously after the imam. You heard it, you were there. So soon as you say Ya Allahu Akbar and you join, you're doing your first takbir with the imam. This joining the imam and with the imam doesn't mean literally side by side or 1 second behind. You could have a slight delay over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. If you do the second takbir, you missed it. Right? So as long as you're there, you're present, you heard the first takbir, and you joined a few moments later, you've done the first takbir. You don't have to do it instantly with the imam. Even the second takbir, the imam says Allahu Akbar, you take a second after the imam. You should do it almost straight away. But the slight delay is not a problem. Even a longer delay is not a problem. As long as you're there and the next takbir has not been done. Okay, don't fall behind. Try and keep up with the imam. Yep.
Whoever attends the funeral prayer after the imam has given the 4th takbir, but before the final salams, is deemed to have missed the prayer, and this is the most correct view.
Yeah, so it says after the fourth one, right? So if
Yeah.
if you get the fourth one, then you get the janaza actually. So I'm just correcting myself there. I said if you get three, then you can't. You can join. After the fourth one, you can't. No, you can. Sorry, at the fourth one you can. So if the imam says Allahu Akbar for the fourth one, and you're there and you say Allahu Akbar on the fourth one, you've got the janaza as well. Okay. So what you do then is um, ومن حضر بعد تكبير الرابعة قبل السلام فاتته الصلاة. Okay. So if you don't catch that takbir, okay, these three scenarios, okay, three scenarios. Let's go through them one by one. You're present for the fourth takbir, and the imam says it. You're present there in the janazah. You're standing there. You can join the prayer. Okay, you can join the prayer. Allahu Akbar in the fourth takbir, and then you make three takbirs and you give salam. You got the prayer. Second scenario, I'm going to go to the end scenario first. You attend after the salam. So all you hear is Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and then you arrive. You just catch the last salam. You just after the salam you arrive. Okay. In that case, you can never join the janazah prayer. Okay. That's scenario two. Either you arrive before the fourth takbir, yeah, so you hear the fourth takbir, or you arrive after the salam. In the first scenario, you can join on the fourth takbir. On the second scenario, you came after salam, you can't join. Third scenario is the one in the book. Okay, so you need to be careful. You've arrived after the fourth takbir, so you missed all four takbirs, but no salam has been given yet. Okay, do you get that, Hassan?
Yeah. So that you'll have missed the janaza.
You missed the
on
fourth
this
takbir in janazah, but has the imam done the salam?
No.
No. Okay, thank you. That's the situation we're in now. So it says here, whoever attends after the fourth takbir before the salam has also missed the janazah prayer. Meaning you didn't hear the takbir, you heard the salam, you're there at the salam, you're like, yeah, I'm joining, they're doing janazah. And all you hear is Assalamu alaikum. Oh, I didn't get a takbir. Yeah. Can you join at that point? The position mentioned here, it says, Fis Sahih, and the most correct opinion is you can't join the janazah prayer. There is an opinion from one of the great Hanafi scholars, a student Imam Abu Hanifa called Imam Muhammad, I believe, that you can do a takbir yourself there, join the prayer, and then do three more and give salam. You don't give salam, obviously. There is an opinion that if you were present after the fourth takbir, but before the salam, you can join the imam, but you're going to have to do three more takbir and salam. There is an opinion, but the one that is mentioned and the one that we're learning is if you arrive at that point where you haven't heard the takbir, but no salam has been given, can you join the janazah prayer? No. You need to be present and hear a takbir at the janazah, and you join with that takbir. That could be the first, ideally, second, third, or fourth, and then you make up the takbirs. Or you do what you do, because if you join the second or third one, you can pray the second. After the second, you can pray the salutations. After the third one, you can pray the supplication, the main part of the janazah. On the fourth one, if you're there for the fourth one, Allahu Akbar, you can join. I mentioned that you can't, but you can join. And you don't pray anything because you just make up three takbeers. You say Allahu Akbar three more times, and you give salam. That's it. If you join after the fourth takbir, but before the salam, you didn't hear any takbeers, but you heard the salam, you can't join the prayer. And of course, after salam, it's agreed upon. You can't join the prayer once the salam has been done. Oh, I just arrived. Right, can I join this prayer? No, you can't. Salam has been done, right? So you can't, if you catch it from outside, you hear them giving salam from outside, it's too late. If you get there to the saf before the salam is done, you still can't join the prayer according to this opinion, but there is opinions that you could join the prayer and do a janazah. But the janazah will just be four takbir and salam. But yeah, that's what's mentioned here. Okay. Again, more rulings. Bismillah. Rulings about the janazah. Let's carry on.
It is somewhat disliked to perform the funeral prayer within the congregational mosque with the deceased in the mosque.
Yeah, this is a big controversial topic actually. It says it's somewhat disliked. Many scholars have said it extremely disliked, like it's prohibitively disliked. It's actually severely disliked, and a janazah should not be prayed in a masjid. And this has caused quite a lot of issues in certain masajid when people are quite adamant on following this opinion. What you'll find is, just if you look at again where did this come from, the Prophet's time, how the Muslims did janazah, they didn't do it in the mosque. They did it out in the open. That's what they did. And even if it wasn't possible out in the open, they'd delay it until it was possible. They wouldn't bring the janaza into a physical masjid. Right? Why? It's not the place for the janaza, right? Now we live in a situation, especially in Western countries, and this happens in Muslim countries as well. When I'm from Pakistan, whenever they do janaza in Pakistan, they do it next to the graveyard. They don't do it in the masjid at all. I've never been to a janaza in a masjid in Pakistan, so they do it like that. However, in Syria, when I was there, and I lived there for a while, I attended many janazas in the masjid, right? So they do it in the masjid now, because I live in a rural area in Pakistan, so villages, right? So they only had one masjid, big masjid, anyway, for a whole kind of several mile radius, right? Whereas in a city like Damascus or England somewhere, it's not really, you haven't got many open areas to congregate people, and it's logistically quite difficult. So they tend to do the masajid, yes. So, of course, is that good or bad to now move the janaza into the masjid? Most scholars realizing that, look, this is the need of the time. This is, it's difficult to find space now, the graveyards and etc. Then, they allowed, with still some dislike because it's not the way it should be done properly, to pray the janaza in the masjid. And I think in the UK more so because we don't have many places outside to maybe do janazas, or it's not always a possibility, then they tend to have the janaza in the masjid. However, I've been to janazas where they basically do the janaza in the car park. They all step outside. There's the body there. They do the janaza in the car park, and everyone goes on their way. Because you don't need to bow prostrate in a janaza. You just need to stand and do your takbir. In Pakistan, when you do them, they go into the field. It's an open, empty field next to the graveyard, and they put the deceased in the front. You all stand there. There's somebody who runs up and down the rows with the rose water. But yeah, so that was traditionally what was done. Janaza or Eidgah as well. This big area where people go out and pray, like the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which was a city. Medina was a hustle city. That would be outside the city, or to one side of the city, which now isn't really accommodated for. Authorities tend to just say do it in the masjid, and so you do it in the masjid. But it's a big thing actually. It has caused issues in certain circumstances, right? But we won't go into that. Let's stop on the mas'ala of a child that is born and makes a sound and then dies. And what's the ruling on children? Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.